So I've sat in the audience at this event for the last 2 years. And at events like this, I always walk away going, wow, like those women on the stage, they have their shit, their stuff together, right? They know what they're talking about. They're amazing. And so I want to let you know right now, you're not going to walk away from my talk with that sentiment. Let me just cut to the chase. Leadership is hard, and half the time I have no idea what I'm doing. But I am always trying to get better, and I run a lot of experiments for myself, which I think does make me better at what I do. Today, I wanted to share with you some of the findings I had from a recent experiment I ran for my own leadership. Let me give you a little context first. So I work at Upwork. We are the largest platform in the world that connects freelance talent with clients all over the world. I've been at the company for 7 years, and for every one of those 7 years, we've been 2 years away from IPO. I'm thinking some of you might know that story too. For the last 4 years, I've run the product and design team. And it's an awesome group. We've got about 70 people today. But earlier this year, I started to see signs of a problem. I started to get more and more questions in my one-on-ones and my all-hands Q&A that were like, how do you deal with burnout? Or, hey, how do PMs here manage the workload? I'm working all the time, and yet I never feel done. Or, I really want to take a vacation, but I just don't know when I can fit it in. So I need to stop, and I need to know if I'm alone. How many of you have heard these questions from your teams or from your colleagues? Please raise your hands. Yes, okay, I feel so much better. My second question is this. How many of you have actually felt that way yourselves? I felt that way too. My team was feeling totally burnt out, and so was I. I don't know what changed. I was working the same schedule I had always worked, or at least recently, which was about 9 to 6:30 in the office, and 8 until midnight or 1 or 2, most weeknights. And I don't know if it was the accumulation of sleep debt after 14 years of this type of thing in my career, or whether it was the fact I just didn't feel like I had the energy that I wanted to play with my 2 young kids. But I got to this point earlier this year where I was just like, you know what, this can't go on. And I definitely can't do this for another 14 years. So the good news was I actually did have a vacation planned. And I thought, this is going to help. I'm going to reset, regroup, figure this out. In retrospect, I should have known better. Going on vacation with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, best case, it's like a survival event. So we somehow got on the plane, we flew to Boston, we were going north to the hometown that I had grown up in, and we had rented an Airbnb, and we kind of got to the Airbnb, and it was this beautiful colonial house, very quaint, very charming, a lot like the house I grew up in. And that was awesome, except we also had arrived during a heat wave. So it was 104 degrees, there was no air conditioning, the house was on a marsh, and marshes can be so beautiful and so full of mosquitoes. And so I don't know if it was the bug bites or the heat or the excitement that my kids had to see all these relatives and friends on the East Coast, but they were wired. I mean, they were waking up at 4 a.m. East Coast time. Like, how is that possible? It's like 1 in the morning for you. And then they're falling asleep at 11 p.m. or midnight, like their normal West Coast bedtime. On top of this, my amazing and wonderful horde of relatives in the area, whom I love, decided that this would be a great place, our non-air-conditioned house, would be a great place to base kind of a week of family reunion type activities. So my husband and I found ourselves cooking for 20 to 30 people a day, watching these like crazy toddlers who were just like, super cranky from the lack of sleep. And needless to say, we got home and we were exhausted. I was like at my limit. I thought, like, I can't even go into work tomorrow. This is ridiculous. So I went to get some help. I went to see my friend Melanie, who is an executive coach I've had the great fortune to work with for the last few years. And I said to Melanie, I can't do this anymore, the hours, the overwhelm, the schedule, and then I had this vacation, and let me tell you how horrible it was. And I looked at her and I'm like, please give me some sympathy and give me some answers. So there's this long pause, and Melanie looks at me, and this huge smile breaks out on her face, and she's like, this is terrific. I am so glad this terrible experience happened to you. These are her literal words. And she's French, but I was like, wow, that is cruel. So Melanie went on to say, I've heard you complain for years about the schedule, about the craziness. I've heard you say you can't handle it. But in that moment, she could see in my eyes that something was different. She could see that there was this combination of vulnerability and resolve that was really needed for me to do something different. By the way, this slide was supposed to be in the backdrop around this whole breaking point. I had hit this breaking point. And so she said, this is my window, Hayden. I'm going to give you a challenge. What would happen if you went to bed every night for 1 week at 10 p.m.? I was like, all right, I can probably do that, and I love a challenge. So yeah, I'll take this on. So I decided that this would be my next experiment. I would go for 1 week to bed at 10 p.m., and I'd report back to her after that week what happened. I run a lot of leadership experiments for myself, and this felt like not just the next essential test, but kind of like this existential test, like I had to do this. So first, let me tell you what I did to make this happen. My first strategy was around alarm clock. Now, this wasn't an alarm clock to wake up. My kids take care of that for me. I set an alarm clock for going to bed. Because the laptop is like this addictive river of work, and once you're working at night, it can be really hard to switch it off. So I set an alarm to remind myself to unplug and call it a night. The second thing I did was I redrew my calendar. I deferred, I delayed, I delegated a ton of meetings, and I created chunks of time during my day when I was actually going to get work done. Because previously I would have this all meetings all day, and then my real work would happen at night. The third thing I did was around email. I completely changed my email habits. I never let myself open my inbox and start reading messages. The first thing I did every time was I selected everything in my inbox, and then I unchecked just the few messages I felt I really had to read or respond to. Everything else, I moved into the archive. The fourth thing I did was around list making. Now, you may be like me and you love that 30-item list that's everything you wish and hope and dream that you're going to get done. The week that I did this experiment, I said no more of that. I cut my list at 3 to 5 items. I made a list of 3 to 5 things I needed to do that day, or 3 to 5 things I needed to do that week. And I carried that list around with me everywhere. The minute I had a break between meetings or a block of work time during the day or at night, I pulled out that list and I looked at those things first. And I ensured that that's what I was focused on. The final thing I did was kind of a surprise. I didn't know I'd have to do this going in. But a few days into the experiment, I realized I had to change my attitude. I had to change it in 2 ways. The first one was I really had to reframe what was possible in an hour or a day or a week. Because I had been laboring for years under these false expectations of everything I could get done. So I reframed what was possible, made sure those things were on my list. And then the second thing I discovered is I really had to learn to manage my own guilt. Because I would come home some evenings and look at my list and realize I had done the important things for the day or even for the week. And yet I felt so guilty not opening my laptop and kind of working and being productive. I realized I had been reframing for years my work benchmark as the hours I was putting in and the busyness. And that's what made me feel like I was doing a good job. And so I had to manage my own guilt that was actually the driving force behind a lot of those late nights, not the workload itself. So after week 1, you might imagine, I was way more rested. I felt better. I had more energy. This had some really good things for me in terms of resilience. These jobs are hard, and you need that resilience to get through the day or the week. The extra energy I had from sleeping well also helped me be a better people manager, because as those of you who are people managers know, that shit is hard, right? There's emotions and interpersonal stuff and all these dynamics in the office. And when you come in fresh and ready to just tackle it, I found I navigated those things way better and more effectively. I also found that my decision-making improved because I didn't have this decision-making fatigue that is a real thing from staying up late, kind of thinking about all these small things. And instead, I felt like I was making really good decisions about important things and doing it really decisively. So this was all well and good. I reported back to Melanie, but I said, you know what? On the one hand, I'm going to keep running this experiment because, wow, it feels good to get the sleep. But on the other hand, I felt like if I kept doing this for a while, surely it couldn't be good for my team. This might be great for me, but isn't that better leader who I always aspire to be? Isn't that the woman who's always on, always available? Yeah, she does the important stuff, but then she does everything else too. And I thought there's no way that if I'm kind of pulling back and drawing more boundaries, that's actually going to be a good thing for my team, right? There's just no way. So I've been running this experiment now for several months, and I actually discovered some really surprising things about the impact that this had on my team. First of all, I discovered that because I was not sending a lot of late night emails that were really like low priority things anyway, I was creating this headspace in my team where they weren't getting those emails from me. They weren't writing low priority emails. They weren't responding at night to my low priority emails. And in fact, we just were doing less low priority work total. Like some of it just stopped and went away. And that's awesome. The second thing about the emails was, I mentioned earlier how my team was feeling this burnout. Well, I had someone say to me, Hayden, it's so nice not seeing an email from you the last thing before I close my eyes. And it's like, I had told my team, like, just because I work late doesn't mean you don't have to, it's fine. I just do this because I have these young kids, But in reality, like, the fact that I was like cranking at night was a problem. And moreover, it created this whole problem with focus. Because I had told them, like, hey, these are the important things. Like, focus on these 3 things. Everything else, like, don't worry about it. But if I'm sending them an email at midnight about some random thing, they're going, well, that's important. And these other things are important. And I realized I had been creating this signal to noise problem around priorities. And when I had that priority to-do list, and I stopped doing a lot of the kind of low-value stuff, it actually created the space and the clarity for them to do that too. And how many of us don't want our teams to be more focused on the big, important stuff, right? And less distracted by the noise? The final thing I noticed was about polish. I'm a perfectionist, and I started my career at McKinsey. And so I think people from McKinsey are famous for like their anal thing about slides looking good, right? We all want our slides to be awesome. And that was like beaten into me from the beginning. So it's hard for me to present something and not have it look really good. Don't look at these slides here. But this interesting thing happened because I had to make some hard calls about what to spend time on. There were things I wasn't going to stay up late for, and so there were certain meetings where I was like, you know what, I'm prepared enough. I'm not going to do the extra like polishing the slides. And specifically, an example of this was with a product all-hands meeting about this survey we do every quarter called Glint. And I really wanted to dive into the survey results with my team. We always have these discussions about what are the findings. So I put the quantitative like screenshots on the slides. I took the quotes from the comments that I wanted to talk about onto my slides. And I looked at it. This thing was like hideous. I mean, these are like the ugliest slides you've ever seen. It's like different fonts. Nothing's in a column. It's just like I threw up on the slide. But it was like, probably 9:55. And I'm like, you know what? This is the content I want to talk about with my team. Spending an extra 20 or 30 for 40 minutes, like making it look really good, like how much is that going to help the conversation? So I took a risk. I didn't fix the slides and make them look good. And I went into the meeting with my team and I said, okay, guys, I want to talk to you about this. Oh, by the way, please pardon the ugly slides. I decided not to spend extra time late last night fixing them up for you. And by the way, I hope that you do the same thing. The conversation we had that day about the survey was like the best one we've ever had. And I realized this thing, not just in that meeting, but over the course of a pattern of this type of behavior, which was when I showed up looking like a little less polished and just a little less perfect, that created the opening for my team to be more vulnerable and to share ideas and thoughts that were risky or uncomfortable. And I realized that this was creating this more like psychological safe space for them to get more creative and a little bit more off the cuff. And this is exactly what we want, right? Those of you from Google or who've read the studies from Google about how you create high-performing teams know psychological safety is the #1 driver of high-performing teams. And I realized that by lowering my own standards on my own work and sometimes showing up not looking like I had all the answers was actually a really powerful lever to get my team to feel safer, taking risks, being more creative, and what product leader doesn't want that from her team? So this was an amazing success for me. I would hope that for you, if you're thinking about your next leadership steps or how you take your leadership to the next level, or if you're just really tired of feeling burnt out, you can ask yourself, #1, what might happen if I actually work less, not more? What possibilities might that actually open up for my team? And #2, what might happen if I actually lower my standards instead of raising them? We always think we should raise our standards. What happens when you lower them? I found these really counterintuitive things when I tried that. So my last comment for you is around leadership myths. I think we have a lot of myths that we tell ourselves and we see in the world about what it takes to be a leader. I think we often labor under the belief that the people ahead of us or the people that occupy those leadership roles that we aspire to have it all figured out, that they have some kind of playbook that maybe we just haven't gotten our hands on yet. So like I said at the beginning, I want to reassure you that there's a lot of people like me, or at least there's one, who definitely hasn't figured it out. doesn't have all the answers. But I do think that doing the work to experiment and try new things is a really helpful tool when you're feeling like you want to figure those things out. The last thing I'll say is if you can join with me and do some of this testing, you can also, I think, challenge some of the very narrow definitions of leadership and how it looks. Like, leaders don't have to look this way or pay this type of price to be that leader. Like, that may not actually have to be what's possible. Leadership might have many more faces, many more approaches, and a whole different toolkit than what we might assume when we first think about that. And so please consider challenging your own instincts, your own beliefs, and putting your PM skills as an experimenter to work in really challenging what those notions that you have about leadership are and what it might take for you to be a leader at the next level that you aspire to be. Thank you.